Hey, scholars, happy Tuesday. Um, we got a lot of good work to look over, and let's start by celebrating our 9% jump up in our turn-in rate. That's over 10 students who stepped it up from over the weekend, so I'm super proud of that. Like always, I keep saying in these videos over and over how proud I am of the effort and the quality of work that you're doing, and I just can't emphasize it enough. The way that you guys have stepped up in this weird time, it really does makes me very happy, makes me very proud, and it makes me really confident of the ability levels that you're going to walk into high school with. Let's look at let's look at the grit list first. Welcome back to the grit list by Imani, Monica, Serenity, and Tamar. I was also excited to take off the highlights from Lizbeth's name and Edwin's name because they were on the grit list the day before and they're still here because they got that staying power. So good job. Let's check our work. Take a second to pull up your answers from yesterday so that you can compare them to the great examples that I'm going to go over now. The first example I borrowed from, some credit here, Imani. What was Thornton's Bluff and how was it called? Imani says, Thornton's Bluff is where Buck can pull a 1,000-pound sled, and Matheson calls it with a bet. So not only did she named the bluff, and she names exactly how it was called. Thornton says, quote, Buck can start 1,000 pounds. And Matheson doesn't believe Thornton. So he says, quote, I've got $1,000 that says he can't. Matheson doesn't trust. And so far, Imani's done a killer job explaining what's happening and throwing the character's words straight into her own explanation so smoothly. Now watch what she does. Now she showed us what happened. Now she's going to get into the characters' heads and with their inferences so that we can go deeper into what's going on. Matheson doesn't believe Thornton's bluff about Buck pulling a 1,000-pound sled, so Matheson calls it with a $1,000 bet. Since Matheson knows a lot about sled dogs, he is expecting 10 dogs to pull a 1,000-pound sled, not only one. This last sentence took this response from a really solid response to an excellent response. Really getting into the character's head. We know that later on in the scene, they're going to unhook 10 dogs and just hook up Buck. And so Imani's like getting into the character's head that shows you why he thinks this is so impossible. Fantastic answer. This next example I borrowed from Diana Falcone, otherwise known as Diana, when I want to bug her. All right, the sentence in yellow I added, and we'll go over why in a second, but let's take a look at Diana's answer to how the term breakout is debated and how the vertical impact Buck. This was the most confused. This was the question that students got the most tripped up on. So we're going to spend a minute here breaking it down. Diana said, breakout was debated by having different ideas of it. The first meaning was Thornton's privilege to knock the runners loose in order for Buck to break out. Matheson had a different meaning, which was breaking the runners from the frozen grip of the snow. So they chose Matheson's idea of breakout. Here's what I added. This is going to make it much harder to get the sled moving, which is why the odds were 3-1 against Buck. All right, real quick, to break out a sled, there was some debate about what this meant. Some people thought that Buck already has to pull 1,000 pounds, so it's only fair if Thornton gets to get the ice. The sled is frozen solid into the ground because it's been sitting outside for a few hours and it's like -60. So this sled already weighs 1,000 pounds, plus it's frozen to the ground. And so there was debate if Thornton would get to like shake off, get it unfrozen, and then just have Buck pull it, or if breaking out the sled includes getting it free from the ice, and then pulling it. Um, most of the people agreed with Matheson that no, you said he could break out a 1,000-pound sled. That includes the ice, and so that's what they went with. Before they decided on that definition, when other people thought that they could get it unfrozen and then Buck could pull it, the odds were 2-1. And when it was agreed upon that no, Buck has to break it has to break it out from being frozen, the odds went up to 3-1, which means the odds are going even higher against Buck. Molly really crushed number 3. This was where you had to really zoom in on a specific detail or description that London gave in order to build suspense. So you had to find those little descriptions, and then you had to break down the effect that they had on the reader. So let's take a look at all 3 of Molly's, because they were really good. The first detail she zoomed in on was the eyes of a dozen men fixed upon him, silent and waiting. Here's Molly's breakdown of what that detail did. This shows that they're all waiting for what Thornton has to say, making it seem more suspenseful just by building detail from the others surrounding Thornton. The effects make it seem way more nerve-wracking for Thornton because the eyes on him waiting for an answer. Yeah, he's got a crowd, right? That always makes things more suspenseful. Heavy with doubt, and now that he looked at the sled itself, the concrete fact, the more impossible the task appeared. This is when Thornton first laid his eyes on the sled with the 1,000 pounds worth of flour stacked on it, seeing it for the first time. This built major suspense due to the insane task Buck has to do to prove that Thornton's bluff was right. When London wrote doubt, he made me think that Thornton really doubted what came out of his mouth, making it more on the edge, and made this bet seem impossible for Buck. The effect of this quote pulled from the text fills the readers up with fear and the thought that we don't know what's going to happen next. The last one she zoomed in on is the crowd fell silent. The fact that the whole crowd is silent and waiting for the moment to happen shows how patient they are to see a dog accomplish this much. I might even say eager to see. So London uses the crowd as suspense and thriller to mean it's an amazing bluff that can or can't be true. This makes the reader seem more thrilled to see what's going to happen. The effect of the crowd shows the suspense leading to Buck's actions to either win or not win the bet. Yes, everyone goes silent. It's that moment where this is the do or die time. All eyes are on Buck. And London did an amazing job building to that moment with all of the examples that Molly just pointed out. And great job, Molly, really breaking down the effect that those descriptions and those moments had on the reader as suspense was slowly built up and up and up. Today, guys, we're about 12 pages done from reading this book. We usually finish about 3 pages a day. So on this pace, we're going to finish by Monday or Tuesday, and then we'll probably be done by Tuesday. I'm not positive yet. I'm still planning out these lessons, but we will get a movie day on the books so that we can enjoy this movie together. I haven't seen it yet, so I want to watch it with you guys. Let's look at today's. Today we're going to learn what happens with Thornton's bet, and we're going to learn what happens after that. Okay. So you've got 5 questions today. And really these questions are just, are you following along with the reading? So I made some of them multiple choice at Miss McKinney's behest, and I made 2 of them open response because this is just a great chance to keep practicing betting evidence because you guys are getting so good at it. And I'm telling you, no lie, this is a skill I did not start using and developing until college. So those of you, and there's a lot of you, who are doing it smoothly, before you're even in 8th grade, you guys are setting yourself up for a mountain of scholarship money. No joke. as, as long as you keep working at it. All right. So let's start together. We're going to pick up on page 69. Right here. Thornton. Okay. Thornton's going to give 3 commands: gi, ha, and mush. It doesn't explicitly tell you what those commands mean, but if you look closely at Buck's response to those commands, you can figure out what they mean. So you will write in really what they mean in the effects column. Now, let me change that heading. Meaning and command. These are the commands: gi, ha, and mush. What do they mean? Look at what Buck does and you can figure it out. Thornton knelt down by Buck's side. He took his head in his 2 hands and rested cheek on cheek. He did not playfully shake him, as was his wont, or murmur soft courses, but he whispered in his ear, "As you love me, Buck, as you love me," was what he whispered. Buck whined with suppressed eagerness. The crowd was watching curiously. The affair was growing mysterious. It seemed like a conjuration, meaning like almost like there's magic or like witchcraft going on. As Thornton got to his feet, Buck seized his mittened hand between his jaws, pressing in with his teeth and releasing slowly, half reluctantly. It was the answer, in terms, not of speech, but of love. Thornton well stepped back. "Now, Buck," he said. Buck tightened the traces, then slacked them for a matter of several inches. It was the way he had learned. "Gee!" Thornton's voice rang out, sharp in the tense silence. Buck swung to the right, ending the movement in a plunge that took up the slack and with a sudden jerk arrested his 150 pounds. The load quivered, and from under the runners rose a crisp crackling. "Ha!" Thornton commanded. Buck duplicated the maneuver, this time to the left, the crackling turning into a snapping, the sled pivoting, and the runners slipping and grating several inches to the slide. The sled was broken out. Men were holding their breaths, intensely unconscious of the fact. "Now, mush!" Thornton's command cracked out like a pistol shot. Buck threw himself forward, tightening the traces with a jarring lunge. His whole body was gathered compactly together in the tremendous effort, the muscles writhing and knotting like live things under the silky fur. His great chest was low to the ground, his head forward and down, while his feet were flying like mad, the claws scarring the hard-packed snow in parallel grooves. The sled swayed and trembled, half started forward. One of his feet slipped, and one man groaned aloud. Then the sled lurched forward in what appeared a rapid succession of jerks, though it never came to a dead stop again. Half an inch, 2 inches. The jerks perceptibly diminished as the sled gained momentum. He caught them up till it was moving steadily along. Pause me as you go back and type in what these commands mean. All right, take a look at what Buck did when each was said, and just break down what's the meaning. Okay, pause me. We'll go on in a second. All right, before I go on, I want to give you the feedback of the day. You don't have any 4-point or even 3-point ASAC questions today. And so the feedback of the day is one that I've given you in the past, which is just my tips on how to write smooth embedded evidence of your own. First, Answer the question in your own words, 100% your own words. How would you answer that question? Then, once you've answered it how you would um, on your own, go back into the book, pull some key words that fit in with what you're saying, and just install them into your own writing. You might have to add a word or two or take out some words to make it smooth, but pull those key words, put them into your own response, and then do whatever you need to do to smooth it out. We'll keep reading just for a little bit more. Men gasped and began to breathe again, unaware that for a moment they had ceased to breathe. Thornton was running behind, encouraging Buck with short, cheery words. The distance had been measured off, and as he neared the pile of firewood, which marked the end of 100 yards, a cheer began to grow and grow, which burst into a roar as he passed the firewood and halted at command. Every man was tearing himself loose, even Matheson. Hats and mittens were flying in the air. Men were shaking hands, it did not matter with whom, and bubbling over in a general incoherent babble. But Thornton fell on his knees beside Buck. Head was against head, and he was shaking him back and forth. Those who hurried up heard him cursing Buck, and he cursed him long and fervently and lovely and softly and lovingly. Gad, sir! Gad, sir! Spluttered the Skookum Bench King. Real quick, if you don't remember from our very first reading, the first person in one of the first 3 people to find gold in Alaska was named Skookum Jim. Skookum Jim. So when it says the Skookum Bench King, my guess is that he's a relative of Skookum Jim. So I'm guessing he's very rich because he was one of the first men to find gold in Alaska, which why they would refer to him as a king, because like among the prospectors and the miners, like he's almost like royalty. Gad, sir! Gad, sir! Spluttered the Skookum Bench King. I'll give you 1,000 for him, sir. 1,000, sir. 1,200, sir. Thornton rose to his feet. His eyes were wet. The tears were streaming frankly down his cheeks. Sir, he said to the Skookum Bench King. No, sir. You can go to hell, sir. It's the best I can do for you, sir. Buck seized Thornton's hand in his teeth. Thornton shook him back and forth, as though animated by a common impulse. The onlookers drew back to a respectful distance, nor were they again indiscreet again to interrupt. All right, this is a good chance for you to go ahead and what's the crowd's reaction when Buck passes the pile of firewood? Go ahead and answer that in your own response. How did the crowd react when Buck passed the firewood, which was like the 100 yards marked off? What was the crowd reaction? And then once you've typed this out, how you want to type it out, go back in, find a couple keywords or phrases, and just install them into your own explanation with some quotation marks to show that it's embedded evidence. Okay? I will leave you guys to it from there. You've got 3 more questions to answer. 2 multiple choice and 1 open response with embedded evidence. And you're stopping on page 73 at They Heaped the Treasure Up. All right. I will see you guys tomorrow. Keep up the great work.